and basically my language was Hungarian. Very lucky. My parents survived, and my two sisters survived. And to survive is pure luck, not intelligence.
So did you know your grandparents? Did they live in?
Right. Well, we're talking about 1930s. My Rabinek grandparents lived a block away, and my Baltimore grandparents, my mother's parents, lived a block and a half away. It was very close area, because we lived in a part of Budapest which was center of the Jewish population, which was quite large. As I told you, when Hungary opened its doors, and there was no pogroms until I became a kid. The population grew, close to 300,000 Jews lived in Budapest. And in Hungary, I looked it up sometime, about 800,000.
Where was that? Where was that at?
I mean, it's all of, in entire Hungary,
okay.
About 800,000.
And so was your family very religious?
We were Orthodox, right? But we didn't. It wasn't overdone. It was basically we just wanted to have a decent life for everybody who we associated with. But in high holidays we went to a temple, and it was in the same street, I believe. For me? Right, my Russian woman, the way I see it, because she was born in a small town in northeast Hungary, which later became Russia. You know, it was, these border areas kept changing hands after each war. And my great-grandfather was worked in a lumber yard. He became a specialist in a lumber yard. And that lumber yard where he worked went bankrupt, and he couldn't find another job in his field. So my mother had to stop work and go up to Budapest and become a seamstress in the early teenage. And she became a good seamstress, and then the rest of her family, grandparents and other members of the family moved to Budapest. But she has worked all her life, and she did very good quality works. Later, much later in her life, when she came to United States, she worked for an individual seamstress, and because her hand stitching was very good for custom-made clothing.
And can you hear a little bit more about your sisters?
Well, my sister Lily, who was about 4 years younger, was a very good student. I was a good student too, because I had to be. It was expected. My father didn't have much to do except support the family. And you felt like you are not just having your teenage years and you do whatever the heck you wanted. But you try to fit into the family in a very positive way. So my sister was a very good student. She went to the Jewish gymnasium too. And, she finished up as a graduate of a musical academy. Even now, she's teaching piano, even piano composer, she's teaching in Chicago. And my sister Vera, who is about 2.5 years younger than Lily. Finished high school in the United States eventually, and she's a college graduate. And, she and her husband are in the field of social psychology, and my brother-in-law was pretty famous. He wrote many books, so that he's respected as a productive social psychologist.
And so did you have a good relationship with your sisters growing up in Hungary?
She wanted me to get together with her.
Pretty good, you know, we fought occasionally. But basically, we were all there for each other. It's a different life than what we're living here in the United States. It's hard to analyze it for me just offhand, but we had to study much harder and do things more thoroughly than my grandchildren are doing. And my children have were doing more than their children.
So I guess, did you have a favorite holiday growing up?
Well, we had holidays were always different. You know, when you lived even life is good food around you. You didn't have desserts every day of the week. You usually had it on Saturday for the Sabbath meal, for the Saturday meal. And when we had a holiday, we had different kind of good food, special food. And it was a pretty peaceful life, and but at the same time, the anti-Semitism of the people was there. So we went, the way you went to school, you know, the Jewish gymnasium was more than a mile away from where we lived, but we occasionally took the streetcar, but most of the time we walked. And we made sure that we don't walk alone, because you wore a cap that identified the school where you went to. And we didn't want to be attacked by anti-Semitic kids.
So how many years did you go to school?
Until I was 16. I didn't finish the gymnasium. Things prevented it.
And what was taught in school?
Well, you didn't have elective subjects. I had several years of Latin, and had to learn German from elementary school on, because Hungary, being a small country, the new books on different subjects were not printed all the time to keep up with the human knowledge in the field. So they prepared us as if we went to college to be able to understand German books.
And did you have a favorite teacher in school?
Well, we had great teachers, because by the time we went to school, the Jewish people who were ready to be professors in college couldn't get a job in college. So they were teaching high school. So they were very well versed in their subjects. And and most of them were very supportive of the students. I was artistic, so my art teacher, and he saw some of my drawing, kind of told me that you might become an architect.
So is that what you wanted to become?
Well, I'm a registered architect.
And so did you have a lot of friends from school?
I was friendly with a lot of kids, and we spent a lot of time together. You know, coming home from school, we stopped at a large park and played soccer for a while before we got home. the fact that we always had to go in a group, we got used to, playing around while getting back and forth. Going there, obviously we had to hurry because early morning, there was a time when the classes started. But the class, the last class I went to, felt strongly enough about old times that they arranged a get-together once a year, and all the survivor guys from Hungary were obviously there, and some people came from other countries, like a friend of mine and I, with our families, we went there. We went back to look at the place.
And so can you tell us a little bit more about the neighborhood that you lived in, kind of what that was like?
Well, I don't know whether you have any idea, but have you been in Europe?
Yes.
Have you seen the kind of apartment houses that people lived in? Basically the towns are full with apartments. You go on a street and then you have an arched opening, and through a tunnel-like section you get into a large inner court, and the inner court has a walking area, several levels to get into the apartments. And many places you have a sequence of inner courts.
And you said you lived by your grandparents, very close to your grandparents?
A big one.
You lived really close to your grandparents?
I thought it's about a 5-minute walk.
So would you see them a lot?
We visited them every Saturday. The relationship between grandparents and children is different than today. When I talk to my grandchildren, I try to get into their life in a way that to understand what they were interested in and doing. That relationship wasn't with my grandfather, even though I saw him, and there was an affection between us, but it's still different.
And in the neighborhood, did you have a lot of friends from school living around you?
They were all, the friends were all within walking distance, basically. And we had birthdays were a big deal, because then the parents were providing a lot of refreshment, and the birthday parties were a big thing through the years.
So did you have a lot of birthday parties for your
Right,
grandparents?
right. We had a large community-like feeling, I remember my father was busy most of the time because they didn't close the store at 4 o'clock. My father's store was about 3 blocks away. So he walked home and many times, and eat dinner and went back because they were open till late. So consequently, there was a father who was doing something with his son, like they go play in the snow or go skating or what do you call that? My mom skips. Sledding. The father would pull the sled and that way they participated in each other's fun time.
So was your mother still a seamstress while you were growing up?
Pardon me?
Your mother was still a seamstress while you were growing up?
Seamster? She wasn't working when life was pretty normal when my father was working. The women were not working in Hungary at that time. But housekeeping was a much bigger job. They didn't have washing machines, and they didn't have dishwashers. Actually, we had a live-in maid to help out because to have a family of 5, it was hardly bearable for one person, and it wasn't a large expense to have a living maid.
Did your sisters help at all, or were they?
Everybody helped in a way, but when they were too small, obviously they did not.
So as a live-in maid, was she like part of the family, or was she just purely helping?
The way things were at that time is that she had a room of her own, but she didn't eat the meals with us. Sometimes we didn't eat a meal at the table either. We just went to the kitchen and picked up something. It is a different kind of arrangement than we have in our apartment layouts. You had to have a kitchen, and you didn't have a refrigerator, so you had a room where you stored your main food items, and they are looked out on some kind of small enclosure so that they didn't warm up, and the food kept very well. And the items that didn't hold up, you had an ice box to keep in.
So did you have a favorite food? Or
Pardon me?
Did you have a favorite food or dish?
My mother was a terrific cook. You know what a challah is? Mm-hmm. Anyway, this is what do you call it?
It's braided bread.
Braided bread. But when a large family got together to eat, made a braided challah this large, and she knew how to flavor food very well. Chicken paprika, you hear that? Mm-hmm. he ate a lot of fowl, chicken food. But this is just basically how everybody else lived. It is not particularly a Jewish custom. It was everybody I knew had similar arrangements or living arrangements.
And so in your apartment building, were there a lot of Jewish people, or was it a mix of different people?
Well, we lived in a neighborhood where the majority of the people were Jewish. Obviously, I didn't know because I just know whom I knew and whom I have seen in the temple. But many people's religion I didn't know. But that's my assumption.
And so did you know a lot of your neighbors in your apartment building?
Yeah. Most everybody, because people didn't change apartments frequently.
But you said that there was still the anti-Semitism. Did you feel that in your neighborhood as well as on the walk to school, or in your neighborhood was that kind of?
Well, there were riots. At times there were hordes of people were running through and pushing around people and throwing stones. So it was definitely an anti-Semitic riot. A few of them I remember. But obviously we didn't intrude into the houses as far as I know, so we just stayed in. Which, basically when you lived in this apartment and you wanted something from a grocery store, you didn't drive. You went over and you found one within a block practically. And at that time, we didn't have telephone at that time, and there was, I don't remember cars. There was an electric streetcar, that was the only public transportation I remember. And, I know lots of horse-drawn carriages around. There were some businesses in our narrow street where these carriages were carrying merchandise to and off. I didn't read newspapers much. The only way you got news was what was printed by government-approved sources. So you really didn't know what went on in the world. The atrocities by the Germans, which started years before they finally occupied Hungary, Germany, were not known to the community. They were some young women I heard about who who came into Hungary and some of the Jewish population was employing as living maids. Somehow it didn't get to be a common knowledge what happened to the families. Many of the people must have thought that it was an exaggeration when they talked about killing. But these young women must have known it because the rest of the family was not in touch with them.
So did your parents explain to you kind of what anti-Semitism was? Like, do
You didn't need explanation, it was everywhere. And you felt it, it is not esoteric stuff. It was expressed by many things. And here was looking back on it, here was the Hungarian parliament. Hungary was ruled by a governor who came into power after the end of the First World War. And in a short time, there was a communist regime took over Hungary for a few months, I think. But unfortunately, there were Jewish names among the communists. So obviously that was if you wanted to spread hate, you generalize that every Jewish is a communist or something like that. But they were beaten down by the governor, who was a high military officer, and then there was a lot of anti-Semitic brutality right after the communists were defeated. But the rest of the legislature of Hungary has two houses. The upper house was assigned, so most of the upper house were church leaders, Church of the Catholic clergy, leaders of the clergy in high position, and there was Calvinists and what have you. There were no Jewish people in the upper house. And when they started to pass anti-Jewish laws in the 30s, it was part of the push of the Germans for Hungary as a partner in the war against the rest of the world. I mean the alliance of England and France and the United States. So when these laws started to pass, they were described in the newspapers, and there was no objection from any of the church leaders to. We were supposed to teach humanity, but anti-Semitism ruled.
So do you remember when you first became kind of aware of anti-Semitism? Were you very young, or?
Well, I told you because of the riots and the fact that my family didn't have any non-Jewish friends. And you know, being attacked going to school, I have to think back what else, but this is what comes to mind. There was no Jewish family who wasn't aware of anti-Semitism because it was prevalent.
So did your family kind of talk about kind of what was going on with the anti-Semitic laws and or it's just...
Well, it's always discussed. We used to sit down to a meal together. Usually dinner was a family meal, and then we spent quite a lot of time to communicate.
And so, I guess going back, in your neighborhood, was there a favorite place that you had to go to play soccer or to hang out with your friends or to just...
Well, that was the way Budapest was laid out. It wasn't rebuilt to help the children out. Like here, you know, they built soccer fields and a place where most of the soccer games were going. You have centers with a number of fields. There was no such thing. We used to go to a neighborhood park, which was closest to where we lived. Must have been 10, 15 blocks away. But the funny way the park was laid out is that they tried to preserve the grass, not giving a chance to kids to play. So we set up a soccer game and started to kick around some, it wasn't a soccer ball, some kind of ball. But if it went on the grass, we were not supposed to get it. So we had to watch the individual who was taking care of the park, and that he's away so we can run and get the ball. But near the gymnasium where we went, there was a very large park. So there was a better opportunity to play. So many times we stopped there, you know, before we started home. It was not easy to find a place to. They were ice skating rinks, so that one place that you could go and do your thing. And the other things, you know, what we used to do is to take hikes, because Buda was a hilly side, and hardly any Jewish people lived on that side. That's where the old king's palace was. That was where the major administrative buildings were. But further in, you could take a streetcar way out and then walk up hills and spend the day in the open air and among trees. You see, because there were no trees around houses, everything was paved.
And And so did you go to school during the summer or did you have vacation?
We took vacation. There was no summer school.
And what did you do during the summer?
Basically, swimming, mostly swimming. There was in the middle center of Hungary, there is a Lake Balaton, which is very interesting that it had a sandy shore on one side of the lake. And that was a good place to spend the summer, easy to walk in and enjoy getting into the water and swim.
So would you go with your family or your friends?
It was always with the family, you know, my mother and my sisters. And, you know, we met people there who came once in a while. I had a friend who was the only child and didn't have really means to get around, so we took him with us.
And how did you get there?
That's a good question. You have to think. I think we took so many things that we had a truck. Drove them down. Or had the truck do the job for us.
And you would just go for the day, or would you?
No, it was going away for the summer.
Oh.
So that's why you needed a large vehicle. And my father used to visit us, used to come down by train.
And how far away was it from here?
Well, if we went to the Balaton, it must be an hour and a half, something like that. He barely had time to take a dip in the lake before go to service.
So do you have any favorite memories of your summer vacations?
The vacations were the best time of the year. But basically, you know, it is like when you go to school, many times you have a very good time in school, you have with kids of your age and do things. I never kept thinking about that. It is quite removed, you know, and I am in my 80s. That was more than 66 years ago.
And what year were you born?
1929.
And what day?
French holiday, 4th of July, 14th of July.
And how old were you when you moved to Hungary?
I really don't know. It wasn't, I was still a very tiny kid. I never asked.
So you don't remember Germany?
No, not at all.
And what city were you born in Germany?
Berlin.
And your sisters were born in Hungary?
For me, you're right.
In Hungary. And both your parents were born in Hungary as well?
No, my father was born in Budapest, but my mother was born in Volodz, which is now Russia. But the people spoke Hungarian and some Slovak language at the same time, because it kept changing hands.
And your mother spoke Hungarian?
Right.
Yes. And that was the only language that your family spoke?
That's the only language we spoke together. Obviously now I speak English with my sisters.
So I guess, are there any stories, favorite stories or memories that you have growing up?
I never think about it somehow. I kind of, after what I lived through, somehow my memory washed away, I guess for self-protection or whatever. But I don't remember much of what we were talking about. I know basic things, but this is really all that. There is nothing outstanding. It's pretty much not a different life than your life. You know, just lived whatever was available around you and whatever pleased you. That's what you did. It basically didn't affect, as far as I know, anything that came later. You don't know what else to ask?
Yeah. We break it up into 3 sections: before the war,
Right.
during the war, and then after the war. So
Right.
tonight we were just going to do before the war, and then hopefully set up another time we can meet with you to do during the war, and then another time to do after the war. If that would be okay with you.
It's okay if you